We'll wait for them, but while we're waiting, can you tell us how you feel?
It's been a long 3 weeks, obviously. It's been a long 3 weeks, but, I think that any client that I've represented, when there's been a result that you don't want, you feel the same way. It has nothing to do with her in particular. Being a criminal defense attorney is an incredibly tough job. You take on the pain and everything else that your client goes through. And so obviously this is a disappointing result, but I've been doing this long enough to know that this is just part one. So now that everyone is here, let me just say this on behalf of the Congresswoman. She wanted me to give you all the following statement. While she certainly is disappointed by today's verdict, she respects the American justice system and respects the jury, and wants the jury's decision to be respected, even though she disagrees with it. This is just part one in a very long process, and there are a number of motions that we intend to file that we believe will stop this case from going forward to sentencing. She wants to let her supporters know that she is still strong and resolute. She still maintains her innocence, and she thanks everyone for their prayers and their support. What she asks is that the press please honor her privacy in the days and weeks coming up, and she wants to send out a special note of thanks in particular. And let me just say, the one thing that I will always remember about this trial is that each day there were a number of her friends who came and watched the entire trial and who spent a lot of time loving her and supporting her. And that to me is an example of friendship and love. And I know the only reason that they did that was because they know who Corrine Brown is and the amazing person that she is. Now, I understand that you guys probably will have a lot of questions. You'll want to ask me what I think personally about the verdict or what I think led to it. And I hope that you understand that I'm obligated not to talk about those things because there are rules of court that I have to follow as a member of the bar. So I can't answer any of those specific questions. Let me just say that the next thing is you should look out for some motions that we will be filing for a new trial. I can't give you the reasons for those motions, but they will be coming soon, and that will continue to fight. I would just remind you finally of this. Governor McDonnell recently went through charges on corruption, and initially there was a rush to judgment to believe that his life was going to end, that he'd been convicted, and as you know right now, he stands as a free man whose conviction was overturned. So the American legal system has a number of levels, and this is just the first step. So with that, I can't answer any specific questions. With that, I can't answer any specific questions about the case.
Guilty,
well, do you think it was unexpected?
Isn't that decisive?
Well, sir, I'm not going to characterize it in any way. All I can say is that you're correct on the numbers, but as far as it being decisive, I'll leave that up to you to characterize it.
Why do you think there needs to be a new trial?
After a new juror was added?
Well, again, with regard to there being a new trial, I will tell you, just like any client, what you do is you sit down, you evaluate the evidence, and then you try to take advantage of all the motions that are available. So I'm not going to lay out the basis for the motion for you now. I'm just telling you that likely we will be filing one.
When you talked to the Congresswoman afterwards, yeah, you talked about her demeanor, but did she hug you? What was her reaction? And what was she telling you?
Well, I won't go into what she told me, but I can tell you that she's an incredibly strong woman. Never forget how this woman was able to get into politics. She fought and sued the state of Florida to be able to get into Congress. And she served in Congress as an African-American woman at a time where that was something that was unusual. You don't do all the things that she's done and accomplish all that she's accomplished without being incredibly strong. This isn't the first trial that she's had to deal with in her life, and it's not going to be the last one. And so I think if any of you are looking for news that she was crying or upset or anything like that, that's not the case at all. She's strong. She's fighting for her innocence. She fought for her innocence during this trial, and she intends to continue to do so afterwards.
Did you expect this outcome?
No, obviously. I didn't expect this outcome. I mean, that's why the Congresswoman pleaded not guilty and took her case to trial. So there was no expectation of this outcome whatsoever. But again, when you talk about outcome, let me just let you know this is the first phase of the process, and this isn't the end.
Do you have any concerns about the jury? I mean, were you happy with this jury?
I don't have anything to say about the jury at all. I don't have anything to say about the jury.
So no comment on a verdict coming a day after a new juror was added?
No comment on that. No, sir. No comment.
Has there been a change of venue?
No comment on that.
Do you still think it was a smart decision for her to testify?
No comment on that.
Would she do it again?
Your
in a new
question
trial?
was, what do I think she's going to do? What is she doing now? Well, you know, she's going to head home. She's going to spend time with family. Obviously, it's been a very taxing time. And, you know, after that, she'll get up tomorrow and she'll continue to fight.
And you?
What are your
What are your plans?
Well, my plans obviously is to continue to work on this case. You know, it's been obviously a long 3 weeks. So, you know, I'll take some time, relax a little bit, look back at some lessons learned, and then push forward. You know, this isn't the end of a process. For any trial, when the verdict comes, there's still one very important thing, and that's sentencing. You know, about 90 days from now, if a motion for a new trial is not granted, she's going to appear in front of this judge, and he's going to have to make a decision concerning her sentence. That's incredibly important work.
What lessons have been learned from this?
What are you thinking about that?
All right, first question, what lessons have been learned? I think the most important lesson I've learned is never to talk about what lessons have been learned right after something. You always take some time, and I respect the question. I know it's a legitimate one, but I don't think there's been enough time for us to really pause and reflect and think about that.
Does your client believe that she got a fair trial?
Let me just say this. I'm going to let her answer that question, and now's not the appropriate time to answer that question.
Do you think, will she be speaking with us?
At some point, obviously. I mean, I think, you know, Congresswoman, you know, she is always going to speak her mind, so just now is not the time. I mean, we're less than, an hour from when the verdicts were announced, so she needs some time to just let this sink in and think about it.
Were there any surprises for you in the testimony? Anybody that testified? Is there anything there that you weren't expecting?
No, not at all. I mean, as part of preparing for a case, you go through the discovery, you do investigation, so there weren't any things that came as surprises to us. And as far as, as far as your question in terms of filing the motion, the rules give us a certain amount of time, but we can also ask for extensions. So I'm not exactly sure when we're going to be filing it, but obviously I know all of you have Pacer accounts and you know how to log in, so you'll be aware of it when it comes out.
Initially, you had said that you expected your case to last a couple of days, and in the end, it was only a matter of hours and only 4 witnesses. Why the change?
Well, obviously things change based upon what's presented by the prosecution, so I'll just leave it at that.
Would we see some of those witnesses in the sentencing, some of those Congress members, Martin Luther King III, Jesse Jackson?
I would expect so. I mean, she has a long record of service. She's done a lot of good things. You know, I think it's important in light of a conviction, people start to focus in on the charges. And just remember, you don't sentence someone solely based on the charges. You sentence them based upon their life. And she's done a lot of good things. I think even her harshest critics would admit that she's done a lot of good things. So, yes, to answer your question specifically, you will probably see a number of people at sentencing that you didn't see at the trial.
You mentioned that there was a governor's case that was overturned, but regardless, I think there might have been some eroding of public trust there. Do you think that even if the convictions are overturned here, can you comment on what you think this will do to public trust in public officials?
Well, I think that's depends on how you define public. I mean, if you define the public as sort of a broad segment of people who believe that politicians are corrupt and let you down, I'm not going to comment on that, but just remember too, there are a lot of people in the public who still believe she's innocent and are not going to take what happened here and then suddenly change their minds, you know, about her. So there's a large segment of this community and nationally who they have a lot of faith in her, they still love her, and they believe her. So I don't think it's going to affect their belief in her reputation or what she's done.
Are you disappointed that the jury didn't buy your story of saying that Ronnie Simmons took advantage of her?
Well, let me say this. I've done this long enough to know that what a jury does sometimes has little, if anything, to do with a lawyer. I don't see it as my story. These are the facts that were presented, and you never know what led to a jury's conclusion. And so, let me just tell you, this is very early on in the process. I know it may seem like this is the end of the game, but this is just, frankly, the first quarter. You know, I'm a big football fan, and I can tell you that this is the first quarter, and there's plenty of time left.
Can she afford it? At the beginning of this thing, we went through, we followed kind of a number of attorneys, and she even sort of finally admitted that this type of stuff is expensive. So, how long are you in the game for, and can she afford that?
As far as whether or not she can afford it, you know, that's really a private matter. I won't go into that, but I will just say that I'm in it as long as it takes to go all the way to the end. And so whatever the end may be that sentencing, be that an appeal, And I'm not thinking about money right now. I'm thinking about the fact that I have a client that I intend to zealously represent all the way through the process.
She was highly critical of government before this trial, characterized this case as a witch hunt. I mean, are you concerned that during sentencing that could come back and be a problem for her?
Well, I think what we have to do is probably be fair to her. This was an incredibly stressful process, and there are times when she said some things, and I'm not sure if she was critical of the government as much as she was maybe certain entities or individuals. But I guess what I would ask people to understand is this: there's really no process like this at all. It's incredibly tough if you're a private citizen, but just imagine being a public citizen and having to go through this. So if at times she said some things that perhaps she could take back in the past, I would hope that in the spirit of charity and forgiveness, people would look past those things and realize that those things were said during a stressful time.
Some of the people who testified against her, she mentioned, were her friends and longtime friends. I mean, could we see them speak on her behalf during sentencing? Is that something possible?
I think so. I think so. You know, one of the things that was incredibly, I think, not surprising to me, but of note, is that a lot of the donors who were called on behalf of the government, when they left the stand, went over and hugged her, shook her hand, in fact, even kissed her on a couple of occasions. So people cannot and will not forget all the good that she's done. You know, let's remember, no one's life is a snapshot. Our lives are films, and you have to look at each and every frame. And Corinne Brown is not going to be defined by what happened here today in this courtroom. She still has plenty of days left on this earth. So I would ask that all of you in your reporting keep that in mind. You're writing about someone who's not just a defendant, you're writing about someone who is someone who's done a lot of good in this world.
Do you think she'll ever have amends with Ronnie Simmons?
Oh, I don't know, and I just have no idea. That's really too difficult a question to answer, to think about at this time.
Potentially faces 357 years. How do you think the sentencing will go? Any leniency?
Right, and that's been one of the more interesting things to watch here, 357 years. Let me just tell you, I usually don't say things aren't going to happen. That's not going to happen. You know, if that were to happen, I would come back here and I would wear, what channel you're from, CBS 47, a CBS 47 hat, and say that I'm an idiot. That's not going to happen. You know, there are federal sentencing guidelines. The important thing to know in this case is that there's no required sentence that involves prison. So, you know, I've heard that figure often, and I know it puts a lot of angst into people when they hear about it. Let me just assure everyone, she's not going to be getting anything even remotely close to that.
We've been hearing like 5 years, possibly 7, and fines. Is that more realistic?
Right now, it's too early to say. Remember, the great thing about our system is that we leave that up to the discretion of the judge, and there's a lot of work to be done between now and the time that sentence is imposed.
You heard a lot about a lot of other entities and people. Do you know if there's any more court hearing or court proceedings or investigations that are happening, or is this matter closed to your knowledge?
I don't know about anything else, and as far as I know, this is it.
What's next for you?
What's next for me is I'm going to leave, and then a little bit later on, I'll be meeting with my client. And, you know, listen, I practice law. I have a lot of cases, and, you know, those people who practice criminal defense, my criminal defense brothers, they know that more often than not, this is the result in cases. You know, ours is a profession where you don't win all the time. In fact, you don't win most of the time. But I think that we've learned to define a win as going into court and giving people the impression that when the trial is over, the client had an attorney who cared and who advocated professionally and vigorously. And so, you know, I'll be honest, I'm human, and there is an element of sadness and disappointment about the result, concern for my client. But there's an old phrase, and that is, tomorrow the sun is going to come up. It's going to come up for me, and it's going to come up for her. And I still have a lot of work to do in this case, and so I'm going to work hard, because we still have the motions, we still have sentencing, and so what's next for me was really the same thing that's next with any case. I'm going to get up tomorrow and keep working hard.
Quite simply, you've said, you know, as we've met you over the last year, she's maintained her innocence, but certainly the jury didn't see it that way, and not even on the specific counts. It was kind of on the overarching charges. And so, is she maintaining that at this point, or has her comment to supporters evolved?
She maintains her innocence, and that hasn't changed. All right, the jury, please understand, our legal system depends upon evidence that's presented in court. and understand juries. While I have a lot of respect for them and I have respect for the system, I think you and I have been around long enough to know that there have been many people who've been convicted months, years, if not decades later. Things have come out that have shown that they actually are in fact innocent. So this is part of a process. You know, the correct way to understand the process, not to take you back to the first day of law school, but this is all about whether or not the state was able to prove its case, and that's why a jury returns a verdict of guilty or not guilty. You know, we don't have innocent or not innocent on the line. So she maintains her innocence. She has always said and will continue to say that she's not guilty of these charges, and that's not going to change because of the result that happened here.
Thank you, Mr. Smith.
you,
I
Mr.
appreciate
Smith.
you talking to us.